Hi, I'm Tony Northrup. For Chapter 4 of my book, Stunning Digital Photography, I want to talk about shutter speed. Now, many people think that when you take a picture it happens in an instant, but the shutter is open for a period of time and it captures everything that changes while that shutter is open. So if there's some movement and your shutter is slow enough, you're going to capture that movement. Sometimes that's wanted and sometimes it's not. The best way to really understand how different shutter speeds affect your images is to go out and take a lot of pictures at different shutter speeds. I'm going to try to fast forward you through that process by showing you a series of pictures that I've taken at different shutter speeds. My first picture shows 1/8,000th of a second. Now, the camera auto-exposed at such a fast shutter speed because I was shooting directly into the sun. Anything shorter and it would have been overexposed. Here's another shot directly into the sun. 1/4000th of a second was the right exposure to silhouette the reeds in the foreground. Another shot at 1/4000th of a second, this time taken in this studio using high-speed strobes. I use these high-speed strobes at a fast shutter speed to freeze the action. A slower shutter speed would have resulted in blurry drops. Here's a picture of a hummingbird at 1/1500th of a second. It's a very fast shutter speed, but it's not fast enough to completely freeze the wings of this bird. As you can see, just the tips of it are blurred. That's not an entirely bad effect because sometimes you want a little blur in there to show motion. This deer isn't quite as fast, but the 1/1000th shutter speed didn't completely freeze it. Most of the body looks good, but if you look closely at the hooves, you'll see just a bit of motion. As I was saying, there's always a little bit of motion in your pictures. The faster the shutter speed is, the less you'll notice it, but it's not always a bad thing. 1/500th of a second is really good for shooting birds. In this case, you'll notice that it didn't completely freeze the raindrops. I want you to notice just how far the raindrops moved while the shutter was open here, because I have another raindrop picture taken at a slower shutter speed, and you'll be able to see the before and after. Here's a picture of my daughter Madeline in the playground. I shot this at 1/320th of a second. You'll be working with this range of shutter speeds pretty frequently when shooting outdoors in sunlight, and for people, that's more than fast enough. Here's another hummingbird picture, this one taken at 1/250th of a second. The wings on this Jamaican doctor bird moved so fast that it completed an entire flap while the shutter was open for that very brief amount of time. Notice though that the body is frozen still. If the wings had also been frozen, which would have required a shutter speed of 1/4000th of a second or maybe even faster, the bird would have appeared to have been pinned in the air and it actually would have looked much less natural. So in this case, 1/250th of a second would actually look better than a faster shutter speed. I photographed this bee at 1/160th of a second. Like the hummingbird, the wings are blurred, but the body is frozen. Here's that second rain picture that I was telling you about at 1/60th of a second. Here you can see that the raindrops appear much longer because they moved farther while the shutter was open. It's difficult to take good pictures of birds at such a long shutter speed, but with some practice and plenty of shots, you can get a few to turn out. I shot this Ferrari at 1/30th of a second and panned along with it as it moved. I experimented with different shutter speeds and it turned out that 1/30th was about right for the car's speed. This allowed the wheels to rotate about 1/8 of a revolution, which completely blurred one spoke into the next. You'll often get pretty slow shutter speeds on dark and cloudy days. This shot was taken at 1/15th of a second at Lake Lucerne in Switzerland. This shot would have been difficult to handhold, except that I used image stabilization. My camera actually canceled out any camera shake that would have appeared. For this next shot, my co-photographer Chelsea photographed me in front of the Boston skyline. She did it at 1/4 of a second, which absolutely required a tripod. Now here's a shot at 1/2 a second of Shibuya Station at night. Shibuya Station in Tokyo is the busiest intersection in the world. You can see that the 1/2 second shutter speed was enough to completely blur people as they walked across the intersection. Those people who weren't moving appear more solid. Shutter speeds of more than a second are almost entirely reserved for night photography and waterfalls. So here's a waterfall at 1.5 seconds. Now, if you shot a waterfall at a faster shutter speed, you would see that individual droplets were frozen. I find the effect of a long shutter speed on waterfalls much more pleasing. It gives a very feathery effect. My favorite shutter speed for fireworks is 4 seconds. What I do is I set the shutter speed to 4 seconds and then take shots of individual explosions. I then blend them together into Photoshop as I did for this shot. This is about a dozen different pictures, all taken at 4 seconds, later combined on the computer. Here's another shot by my co-photographer. This one's at 8 seconds. You can see that the 8-second exposure nicely blurred the water. It also allowed some of the stars in the night sky to appear. Now, most cameras only support shutter speeds of up to 30 seconds. If you want to go beyond that, you'll need to attach a remote shutter release with a timer. I did that and set it to 3 minutes in order to take this light painting picture. I then held a glow stick in my hand and waved it around the subject to give the appearance of fire. Because I was moving the glow stick, the light it gave off appeared in the final image. So wherever I held the glow stick during that entire period is where it appeared. It's a technique called light painting, and I go into great detail in my book. Here's a 3-minute night shot of fall colors. Now, in rural areas where there are no city lights, you need exposures of 3 to 5 minutes just to expose things properly. As I recall, there was no moon on this night, so I was relying entirely on starlight to light the trees. If you look closely, you can see that the stars aren't dots, but rather lines. Because the Earth is constantly rotating, the stars seem to move around the North Star. This next picture, which is about a 45-minute exposure, illustrates that better. All of the stars are rotating around the North Star, which appears in the center of that radial point. It's difficult to get a good shot while keeping the shutter open for 45 minutes, so this uses a technique called image stacking. I took about 80 different pictures at 30 seconds each, and then combined them on the computer. It's the best way to get a really long exposure. I go into detail on how to take each of these pictures in my book, Stunning Digital Photography, which you can get on Amazon. The ebook is just a couple of bucks, and if you want the print book, it's about $20. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to contact me at tony@northrup.org. If you want to see more videos like this, click subscribe up above, and please click like down below. Thanks.